Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? Welcome back. It is Thursday, August 8th, and do we ever have a treat for everybody today? It's taken a little while to get here, but we finally got David in the green room. He's going to speak to us, and this is something that's near and dear to my heart, because this is from my opinion, the greatest gift that we can do is help people to communicate, to help them restore some of the sanity in their immediate worlds. The question I get asked the most is, how can I reach the people that matter to me to have discussions? And there's a lot of people crying out for help and understanding, and we have the great privilege today of having David Charalambous, excuse me, I hope I got that right, joining us today, who has put together a program. David, I gotta brag you up here for just a minute or two before I let you take over, just because I'm so excited. This has been a long time coming. That I watched first. It was introduced to your work about 2 years ago, and I was like, okay, you're on to something there, but it's taken a while. Good things take time, and you put together a program that I've been impressed with. I've seen testimony of. You've helped me in the short period of time that I was able to, in one program of sitting with you and listening to your teachings. Our community here is pretty blessed. We get a lot of experts on here, but communications is the biggest thing that gets stolen from people in times of stress and trauma. And you've helped me to do that. And that's what I'm encouraging people to do, is to get plugged into this show. So everybody that's out there, watch this. If there's one show that you want to get something out of, David, thank you for coming here today to help us rearrange our toolboxes and fix a bunch of problems that have basically blindsided society.
Thank you, Wayne. It's great to be here. And yeah, communication is so key. The world is really suffering from lots of noise, lots of information, but not a lot of communication going on. And that's one of the things that I really saw at the beginning in March 2020. And that's one of the first things that we really targeted to try and enable, that people could get back into having a conversation. A lot of conversations, particularly on social media, there's not a lot of communicating going on. There's really a lot of mud throwing and, statements being made. It's almost like there's two drunk people in a pub talking to each other. They're just talking, but they're not listening.
A lot of emotion, a lot of vitriol, a lot of confusion, misinformation. So much that affects the dynamic of our relationships, that it's basically a log jam of emotional discontent mixed with trauma and entire societal level trauma, not just individual, but it seems like everywhere you turn.
Yeah, well, there's a global trauma going on at the moment, and there's a number of things that are going on. And I was on a show the other day, and they were talking about how crazy the world's become. I'm saying, but with all the misinformation, I said, well, in fact, I think the blowback might have a positive effect, because people need to not trust media, and people need to start thinking for themselves. The problem is that people, it's a lot of the time, it's the way our brain works, that seeing is believing. And because behavioral science has made and behavioral science really is the study, let's say the study of why we decide what we do, the way we think, why we think, and why we behave the way we behave. So we put those under the umbrella of behavioral science. It's made incredible discoveries the last few decades. Now, it's almost like when you looked at the arms race, it's almost an information race in the same way that
100%.
And really my target's been to level the playing field. So that's why a lot of the time you'll see, I took a decision. I have my own views around a lot of the subjects, and they will probably match quite closely to yours. But what I do is I try to abstain from pushing my views and just creating a communication where the truth will just reveal itself if people have the right attitude. the problem is that certainty is one of the biggest problems, because understanding how the brain works and how we come to conclusions, it's quite easy to mislead people. For instance, you could show me fake videos of someone and I not know they fake, and then I take a negative viewpoint of that person, and then I'm going to act a certain way or have a certain opinion, and I might not know I've been manipulated. If I act with certainty, I'm going to go down some potentially bad roads. Makes sense? But if I always have that sort of curiosity, not being certain, being humble, then it's, you're going to be much, much harder to manipulate.
That's a really key point, and something that I've been noticing even more and more overwhelmingly lately. And I guess maybe it's just because of my experience and time served in this media space now. I see the alternative media kind of turning into that same recreation of the other side of the fence because of straight up partisanship. Everybody is definitive. Nobody wants to open up both sides of the mirror per se for discussion. So I see this kind of encroaching into the I don't want to say the alternative society, but the dazed and confused, the traumatized people that aren't, that are the victims of all of this manipulation at this point. And to me, the greatest enemy and existential threat is the legacy media, because of all of those things that they've weaponized and harnessed, and now they have distribution at scale, and that's what allows them to do the things that they're doing across the board. There's a lot to that. That's the investigative side of it, but I wanted to just highlight here for a second that you don't come by these theories and ideas idly. When people get to your website, they'll see that your expertise is among behavioral science, NLP, EFT, general semantics, system theory, process mapping, dynamics, and communication. All of those things that are different tools to address the greater problem that we can identify, that the whole world is a dumpster fire. There is no communication in it, but nobody's got a tool, it seems, to address the problem.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest, all of those things that I've studied have one thing in common, and they're really perception. And that's what's key, because we don't live in reality. We live in our perception of reality. And that's why, as you mentioned quite rightly, the media is one of the most dangerous, but it's also one of the greatest opportunities. It's incredible. See, the thing is, if we look at a tool, and behavioral science is a tool, it's a very, very powerful tool. And with any tool, it needs to be respected. You can build houses with a tool, or you can destroy cities. And that's where, these tools aren't good or bad. Sometimes they get reputations because of the way they've been used. Obviously, things like nuclear weapons are so big and powerful that I don't think man has got the responsibility to be able to use things like that. So, but wouldn't admit it. But the media effectively is a vehicle for propaganda. Okay. It's a vehicle for information, but it just tends to be that a lot of the time information often isn't purely presented. It's presented with an agenda. And today's world is far different than it was a few decades ago for a couple of reasons in the media space, in that we, i.e. the people and the general public, used to be the client and the stakeholder of media. So we would buy newspapers, we would buy movies, we'd buy all these things. Now that space changed, and pretty much a lot of free newspapers came out in the UK, probably the same in other countries. And then obviously with the invention of the World Wide Web, then information a lot of the time was given away and doing like lost leads. And then what happened was the space changed. So now what you've got in the UK, as an example, the biggest advertiser in the UK media is the government. Okay, yep. Far. And also what you've got is billionaires owning these big media companies. So we're no longer the stakeholder. We're no longer the client. We're almost the consumer or the mark in some respects. And that's why it's far different than it used to be.
Well, you guys over there, you've got like the TV tax, where you are directly taxed with or without choice.
Well, some are. Some are.
Right?
But, yeah.
here in Canada, they just have 100% replaced all of that money with federal funding. So there
Exactly.
is zero accountability in. So to me now, I literally have labeled them the mercenary media, because they are effectively hired to assassinate truth and by proxy killing people. So that's by definition what mercenaries do, and this is what we're legitimately up against. And until we can effectively address that, we're going to continue to see this programming, because it is the direct interface of the will of the state at this point, and there is no accountability, and we can't beat that by recreating that with the same level of authoritarianism as they have. It doesn't work that way. So I'm really hoping that we can educate our own perspective media. We all have a bias or an opinion, but to do that, to express that through dialogue and communicating with the dissenting opinion or the unpopular opinion.
Yeah, well, it's once you enter dialogue, and it really does depend on a lot of people's intention. Intention's very important, because, and what you're seeing now is that when I was growing up, when you asked a child, what do you want to be when you grow up? It would generally be, footballer, ballet dancer, whatever it would be,
Fireman, policeman, yeah.
Exactly. But a lot of it seems to be that if you ask the young today, from what I see in the studies, they say, I want to be famous.
I want to be an influencer.
They don't say what for. It's literally direct to the famous. So society's values have shifted a lot, and they shift often slowly. You don't notice. And in football, for instance, which you guys call soccer, I think, and in the UK, it used to be frowned upon if a player would move to another club for more money. Okay. But now it's not frowned upon, it's expected and actually questioned if they don't. So you've seen a change in values, and that isn't accidental. And I was doing a presentation the other night about, because I've started to do a lot of research into how the media messages in TV shows come about. And I noticed a lot of patterns. For instance, I'm very fascinated with Sherlock Holmes and detectives and deduction. It's really one of my things. And the US TV version of Sherlock Holmes is actually really well made. But there's so many agendas in there in terms of narratives. And what's interesting is that you think, oh, is this just accidental? Is this just thing? But you find out, because for instance, you take Sherlock Holmes, and when he's talking about a conspiracy theorist, okay, which is classic because Sherlock Holmes is a conspiracy theorist. That's what the character is.
But a journalist is meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. And it's got a negative connotation. And that's funny because, there's so many words that have really changed their meaning. But if you look, so the conspiracy theorist character in Sherlock Holmes is usually, and there's numerous ones throughout the seasons, and I will watch it as part study, part entertainment. And the conspiracy theorist is usually overweight, low IQ, not well at explaining themselves. So basically what they're doing is they're painting the picture, and it's done unconsciously. So what they can do is that this is when there's something, I mean, you'll probably know this in media with your background, is that so much of learning is implicitly that you'll watch something and then you go, and then your mind learns, but you don't realize. Now, it turns out that Dirty Dancing was actually written on purpose to make people more tolerant to abortion. Now, whatever your views on that are, I don't think many people would realize when they're watching the movie that was the intention of the movie. So it's literally propaganda. Now, what often the propaganda is it's not the main story, because if it was the main story, then it would be sort of up for question or debate or whatever. But they put it in as the side story. Now, what happened with another term, say designated driver, that in the 20s and 30s, this was widely accepted in Scandinavia. And then in the 80s, the Harvard Alcohol Project got together with Hollywood and ABC, and they wrote the script lines into Dallas, into Cheers, into all these different shows that people would then understand what designated driver is, and it would be widely accepted. Now that, you could argue, is an okay use, because it's telling stories for people not to drink drive, which is obviously not good. But where does it stop? Because what you're seeing now is that it's not positive outcomes, what it is, like, you can't watch a show now. I mean, and a lot of the topics, you know, you can't even talk about because then you're some kind of bigot. But, you know, I've got some gay friends, but I don't know a single lesbian couple of mixed race. Okay. So I don't think it's that common. I mean, it probably could be, but nearly every TV show has an example of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's far more frequent than you would expect it to be. And that's the thing. And it's like almost like, and because of the norms and the framing now, I almost
the normalization of it. Yeah.
But it's almost a normalization where you can't talk about it.
Yeah, it's programmed. It's inherent. You must believe it, and you cannot question it.
Yeah.
And the other side of that is like you said, with Footloose, that was almost a side story, and at the same time, the opposite side of propaganda is censorship, because they are symbiotic. One cannot work without the other. So the abortion supporters want to silence and demonize the bad guys, the anti-abortionists. So that is the mainstream story that they weaponize the narrative with, and the manipulation. They nudge you to being pro-abortion through this fascinating love story. So there's this symbiotic programming that takes place, and it's gotten so, in my opinion, so extreme and absurd now that they have nothing left but Orwell's level of down the memory hole, and allow people their 2 minutes of rage, and how dare you, the most important message by the state, don't believe your lying eyes or else, is kind of where we're at. And insanity like that is unsustainable.
Well, 1984 was supposed to be a fictional book, not a playbook.
Right, exactly.
And I literally, I see so many memes about it, and they just hit the nail on the head. It's like, I was thinking the other day, we need to make a new movie called 2025, and just literally translate whatever's going on today in the same language as it was before, because all they've done is change the words.
100%.
I mean, this hour hate that they had in 1984 is literally just watching the news. It's, this is a bad person, feel bad things about this person. But what's really interesting is that because the way that our brain functions, we don't want to admit as humans that we're easily fooled. Okay. And this is why Mark Twain said, it's easy to fool someone than convince them they've been fooled. But because of that process, that we want to believe we have free will. And I do think free will exists. And I think that understanding the places where we don't have as much control as we think gives us more free will. So for instance, a lot of the processing that's done in our brain is unconscious. Okay. So if I said to you, what's 5 times 5? You go 25. Okay. You don't have to sit there and consciously work it out, because you've done it before and your brain automates it. Now, we do this with so many different things that it's so easy to make a mistake or have bad information in there, that if you had one score and people were told that 5 times 5 equals 20, okay, and then you ask someone the question, they said 20, and you went, no, that's not true. They go, oh, don't be ridiculous, because there's such a certainty in what the brain's produced, and that's what leads to a lot of people being able to be manipulated. Just this absolute certainty that what our brain spits out must be the truth. But it might, because I do a lot of work and looking inside myself, and I realized that so much of the stuff I was told at school is just not true. Okay. And there may be stuff in there that I haven't come across yet to actually find out that it's not true.
I sorry, it makes me chuckle, because I ended up growing up being that kid where at 10 I got an encyclopedia set, because I knew at that point our government was lying to us here in Canada, because I had an uncle who had survived the Japanese internment camps in Canada, and his story was nothing like what they were trying to teach me in junior high school. And I went, wait a minute. And from that point on, the rest of my life, I have questioned everything.
Right. Now, in that story is such a key point. Okay. So what you've shared is the big contradiction that happened to you that broke the narrative. Okay, wrote the stories that you're being told. Now, what happens is that when those contradictions become so glaring that you can't ignore them, and it does depend a lot on what's going on in your life in terms of what job you do and everything else, all these things. There's so many other relevant factors, but the key is, if you want to make someone aware, you've got to show them the contradictions. You can't tell them the contradictions. Okay, now what do I mean by that? Because a lot of people will think, well, what does that mean? So if I tell you ivermectin works, I'm telling you. Okay, I'm not showing you. But if I tell you a story about John Swanson being on a ventilator, okay, they tell the family he's got a few days to live. The family says, well, we've got nothing to lose, let's put him on ivermectin. The hospital refuses. The family takes takes the hospital to court. They win an injunction. They give John Swanson ivermectin. A week later, he's at home and healed. That's showing you that ivermectin was effective. Okay, and that's the difference. And it's so key, particularly in media, that there's a really good book called Switch by Chad Heath, and there's a lot of examples in there. In the one particular example was really striking to me, that one guy come into a big company and he was looking at changing the way they purchased equipment. And if he goes to the directors and say, oh, we're wasting a lot of money, they go, yeah, well, we know, like it doesn't really have any impact. But what he did was he found one thing where they bought 420 different types of gloves, okay, or all different types of prices. So literally the same glove, $5 from one company and $15 from another. So he got his assistant to get one example of all of these, put them on a boardroom table, okay, with the labels, and he invites the directors in, and they're speechless, okay, because once you get to see in real concrete fashion, it makes a change at deeper parts of us, okay, and that's why the media has such power, because they show such graphic pictures, such concrete stories, such the way that they frame it, the way that they tell it has such a profound effect on people's unconscious minds that it shapes their opinions. Okay, and we then think, and see, that I said to someone yesterday, because one of the realizations I've had is that I can't decide how I feel about watching something. It's automatic. Okay. Well, I can't decide to watch. I can't watch something and decide to have a certain conclusion. That conclusion is arrived at automatically from my whole being. So if you, and this is what people don't realize, you can take a Navy SEAL and stick him in a room for a month with some interrogators, and they can literally, and it's been done, isn't it? They can literally brainwash that person and condition them with a new personality. Okay, if they can do that to a Navy SEAL, what chance does a member of the public have by watching the TV? It's so persuasive.
That's that's been something that I've been following for decades. The ability, the knowledge, and the evolution of that. People talk loosely about some of the programs that are, have come to light, the MK Ultras and some of these other programs. Those are things that are, they're the distraction at this point. I saw, I tend to watch things like older West Point Graduate Academy lectures on tech and strategics, because they're talking about things that people today haven't even yet figured out, and they're already teaching them that because it's no longer relevant as classified weapons, those kinds of things. So when it comes to the abilities to program and get people to do things, I think this is one of the casualties of the discussion, because everybody broad brushes it with that MK Ultra stroke, and nobody looks any deeper as to how did this actually happen. It's not just that simple, and we get caught in these dichotomies of acceptance that then become the truth, and we've become victims of our own objectivity.
Yeah, it's quite challenging, but at the same time, we're talking back to that level playing field. Once you've got a concept of something, and once start knowing things about it, then you'll get a certain amount of protection anyway. But then you can make the decision, right, I now got to be quite careful about what I watch, because if you watch enough of something, it will shape your opinion.
You become what you're surrounded by. That's
Exactly.
basic human nature.
Yeah. So I remember watching, I was always, two things, like I love Sherlock Holmes and I also love the time travel aspect. There's something that really fascinates me about that in fiction. Excuse me. Now, I used to love, when I was growing up as a child, I used to love watching Quantum Leap. I don't know if you remember that TV show.
I remember the show.
So the concept's just very fascinating. You know, he leaps into another body. Anyway, the modern day version is literally, one of the main characters is a guy, but dresses as a woman, but then has a girlfriend. So it's really confusing. And what they're trying to do, like I was watching an expert in semiology talk about this earlier, they make the term man and woman so fluid that you really don't know what it is. You're losing your basis in reality. There's nothing like, you know, what's a chair, what's a dog, what's the thing. So words are so key, because words are labels, and then we build thinking from that. But if you have no foundation from which to understand what something is, so in that TV show, you know, they've got that character, and then he goes back in time, and there's another character that's a woman but wants to be a guy, and then they make this very emotional, powerful story to make you side with these people. But the key point is, none of that's real. Okay. But there's a part of our brain that doesn't know that's not real. It's a TV show. So it's so persuasive in moving people's opinions. And study after study have shown that TV show will really change people's opinions.
There's this, I use the term avatar reality. In this is where people have invested their entire self-worth in this digital space and that digital representation and avatar character. They've invested everything of themselves into that, and then now they're controlled and manipulated by this. It's as real as a heart attack to them, but yet it has no bearing. It's like, then as soon as you take off the goggles, like in Ready Player One, then you see, you know, the devastation. So you don't want any of that. So you put the goggles back on, and you go back into that avatar universe, and that's just how I see the separation, almost in recognizing the patterns of behavior. It's, to me, it's glaringly obvious at this point where somebody lives. Do they live in reality, or their feet grounded in reality, or are they 100% invested in that avatar space? And that avatar space creates an inherent, in my opinion, nonstop subconscious and conscious addiction to fear and isolation.
Yeah, but it's going to do a lot of things on top of that, because what I've noticed, and I spend as little time as possible on social media. You know, I do use it because I, you know, put out messages and share videos and etc. But I noticed that Facebook is not passive in any way. I've noticed a lot of patterns. So Facebook almost wants me to not like females, and it almost, like, what it will do, it will post so many memes. For instance, I saw one the other day, and it had a woman saying, if the guy wants me to pay half rent, then I'm leaving. Okay. And then there's a guy comment underneath that says, well, you can't even pay half rent, where you going? Now, what it's trying to do is it's trying to evoke emotions of a guy seeing a woman that's just a gold digger rather than a very nice, you know, centered person. Now, if I go down the feed, I'm bombarded with that. And I've spoke to friends of mine that are female on Facebook and asked them, and they're saying they're bombarded with the opposite. What you got is they're trying to drive this wedge, right? And they're trying to show it. But you see, it's so subtle, because it's literally my work is spotting patterns, and I look for that stuff, that I didn't notice it at first because it was so subtle. Okay, because I very much like watching animal videos and other stuff like that, but it was so subtle. And what happens is that Facebook did an experiment, I think back in 2012, And what they did was they took 1 million users and they manipulated their feed, okay, which the people that found out were not happy, because like they secretly manipulated people. What they did was they showed up certain emotional posts for some people, and for others a completely different emotion. What they were measuring is then what happened to that person's emotions over the following days, and they found that they could literally manipulate and control people's emotions. But people weren't aware they were being controlled. So it's very key that if you don't realize that, you know, if I'm in this room and what I'm seeing, and then someone's able to move and change things, but I don't know they're doing it, they're going to change the way I feel, but I wouldn't know. And that's what's so key about this, is that the stuff that's, and subliminal, when people think about subliminal, they think, you know, popcorn and Coca-Cola, but it's much, much, much more than that. But if I said to you, before I mastered language, I wondered what I needed to do to master it, okay, your attention is likely going to the end of that sentence. What did he do to master it? But what are you not questioning?
You're already a master.
Exactly. Okay.
Right.
So what happens is when a stream of information comes that we're exposed to, but there's too much of it, we try and automate the bits we can. And this is what happens, that so much gets in the back door that when people understand those language patterns, they can layer lies into sentences where parts of it are truthful. And this is why I would advise against people consuming their information via videos. Obviously, you know, this is different what we're doing. But what I say is that if there's too many moving images, okay, if you're just two people having a conversation, there's a lot less information. But if you've got loads of moving images and cars and flashing lights, so much can go into your mind without your knowledge. So if you want to take in information, a lot of the time it's best to read.
Programming.
Yeah, it's better to read it, because what they've shown is that on those, have you seen those stock programs where they have the flickers moving, or the sports programs? What they've shown is that when they've got, I think, 1 or 2 flickers that are going under the screen, the brain goes on a completely receptive. It can't take all the information. It just goes into and it's so crazy, because what they're doing effectively is shutting down critical thought. And what they've also shown is that if they, there was one book written by a genius, and he seems to have sold his soul to the devil, because in the book he's made the statement, if you're worried about the safety of your drug, do this to get more trust. And I'm like, what the hell? Why don't you just make it safe? But one of the other things he showed was that if a company has an advert that could get objected to, put it on the radio, because they got a lot less objections, because when people are listening to the radio, they're generally doing something else, and that something else is going to take the critical part of the consciousness, and then that information is just going to flood in the mind. Okay, so when you're walking around the supermarket and they're, you know, and the COVID adverts are going on continuously, that's really problematic, because you're not going to be able to decide whether you believe that or not. It's just going to get just pumped in there.
That's wow. There's a few things there I wanted to touch on. You know, got to rewind it back a little bit. You know, to that, you know, that incremental over bombardment that confuses the message to the point where society at large cannot determine XY chromosome, no tallywhacker, that is a woman. Now we have the Olympics at the world's level, you know, disrupting the entire universe in controversy, because nobody can figure out something, you know, even that based in reality. And that, you know, that brings me to constantly be reminded, you know, like you said, Orwell wrote the fantasy that was supposed to be the fantasy, became the playbook. Yuri Bezmenov gave us the evidence that people would, you know, unequivocally deny that, you know, for example, XY chromosome, no tallywhacker. Well, no, that can be anything you want it to be. And here we are, you know, where they've captured the whole planet, both sides, the avatar verse and the reality, in their insanity. How do we deconstruct this insanity, David? We've got limited time here today, so yeah. I want to kind of get to, I want to show your website here, actually, before we get going. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is we've been looking at this here in this program specifically, a white paper based on participatory action results study, which is basically the rebranded Hegelian dialect, where I wanted to pull that graphic up here. I've got it. To get your thoughts on this just before we get into again, how do we dissect some of this? This is a study that we looked at just about 2 weeks ago. David, have you come across this? Because I've been talking about this, as a rebranding of the old Hegelian dialect, and it's really just define the problem, watch the action as you're describing, monitoring in real time, observing, and what you were describing with what Facebook has done and what these guys have adopted as policy implementation procedure in our countries.
That's that specific one.
Your mic has moved again. I'm gonna get you to try that.
How's that?
Oh, that's better. Sorry.
Yeah, I haven't actually heard of that, but I'll take a look into it. But definitely, I do know about the waves in the. You push, then you back off a little bit, push, continue to back off. And then you can really move the Overton's window, because I did a few presentations on this, because Overton's window is obviously very key to this. And just for the listeners that might not have come across it, I think it was John Overton, who was a politician, and he described Overton's window as that space which is, where you can have acceptable dialogue. And anything out of that space really is taboo and you can't talk about. And the media pretty much sets the dialogue. Now, what I noticed, literally during the pandemic, you could not question an experimental medical product, right? You literally come to the point. It then became commonplace for people to wear masks and act like germaphobes. So it really turned upside down, because the constant propaganda was really incredible. They would push, take off, push, take, and people just, the Overton's window was shifted so far to the point where people started holding fascist ideas, and that became the norm and it became acceptable.
This show was born outside of the Overton window. I hosted a series called Doctor Talks with every doctor and vaccinologist that knew what was going on going back in 2021, and I paid a really big price for that. Dr. Bridle became infamous because of coming on my platform, and that evolved to 50 straight doctors from Reish to McCullough, Alexander. They all got introduced through the Doctor Talk series right here on this platform in 2021. That's gone on to become the World Council for Health, some of those people, the Canadian COVID Care Alliance. So we're pretty familiar with what it's like living outside of that Overton window, where it's kind of stunning to me how often our community that have been watching for the 5 years, they say, well, Wayne, why is this in the news now? You talked about this, 2 years ago, you taught us about that. And it's exactly that Overton window that they seem to have control of.
Yeah, well, the thing is, it's changing. And it's moving significantly. And well, what you've got now is the confidence in medical practitioners has dropped from 70% to 40% in the last few years. So trust, people don't realize how important trust is. Trust is so key. It's such a fundamental part of how we process and make decisions.
Maybe you can smack your mic again there.
How's that?
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, it must be that wire when it's touching that one. What are you familiar with the marshmallow test? It's that famous test around if people can delay gratification, then they generally end up with much more success. Well, what they didn't realize that in that test, one of the main factors was trust. That if you didn't trust the actual guy was going to come back and give you 2 marshmallows. So trust is so key in so many areas. And once that's gone, it's generally not recovered.
Right.
So has lost its trust. The medical professionals have lost its trust. Governments, I mean, I thought that lost it years ago, and they just was using science as a backup now. Now, that's the thing that they don't take into consideration, and logic never does. Logic thinks that everything happens in a linear fashion, but it doesn't work that way. You know, if you're driving somewhere and you suddenly realize that isn't a good place, you will change direction. And that's what happens. And that's why I say a lot of people, it's very easy to get apathetic in today's world, but people really want to realize that we're not static. You know, we are organisms with consciousness, and we will start to change our directions, and the game will change very quickly. So people will say, oh, well, this has happened, so next year it's going to be work and all that. But in fact, you know, although these maniacs is the best way I can describe them, pushing, you know, all these different agendas, the space is much better now than it was a year ago, and a year ago it was much better than it was 2 years ago. You know, when in terms of how you can have conversations, in terms of, you know, and we don't realize how many wins there's been. You know, because people don't realize, because the media never really, you know, will admit the losses of the people that pay it. So, you know, so when they lost the mask mandates, when they lost the vaccine mandates, when all these things where they failed, they're not really highlighted, and people don't realize that what they're doing is making a big difference. And that's really important, because that's one of the things the media are portraying, and that's what Besmoff was showing, that to demoralize a nation, you've got to show them that they have no control over their environment. Okay. But they don't realize that consciousness, you know, people will cotton on at some point. Okay. I had a friend of mine, there was two people I couldn't get through to during the pandemic. Okay. That I tried to, and both of them have done 180s over the last year. Okay. One of them sent me an email apologizing and saying he's completely, you know, changed his 180, all of his belief systems. And the other guy actually was with a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking, and he literally said, look, you know, taking the vaccine was one of the worst things he did. And I said, well, look, you know, we tried to have the conversations. And he said, yeah, he said, but I was brainwashed, you know, and it was crazy. And he said, but one thing I think's happened, and this is from a guy that, you know, took all the jabs, believed all the things, wore the mask, posted all the stuff. He turned around and said, so many people now know what's going on. Yeah. So many people now know what's going on. And that's going to shift so many things. That what happened, and that's where framing is really important. So if you talk to the viewers, when they think about how many people know what's going on, they're going to think about the people closest to them as a reference point. And if you've got a few people that haven't been reached, particularly those that have relatives that are doctors and nurses, they're going to be the last people, you know, because they would have been the first to have realized, or the last, in the sense that, you know, the ones that knew what's going on spoke out, and the ones that didn't, they just went down this, you know, this constant, you know, doubling down effect. But when you look at the numbers, yeah, outside of the framing, the number of people taking the boosters is so low. The number of people buying into these things is so low that there's such a problem with the narratives now, that we're in such an interesting space. And I don't think anyone truly knows what's going to happen. But, you know, so many people know about the WEF. So many people know about things. I mean, I was playing golf yesterday, and one of the guys behind us, you know, caught up, and then we started playing together, completely aware of everything. You know,
I was going to, you know, comment on that, in that, you know, they're coming at us again. Now they're calling it mpox instead of monkeypox. And I am far more confident in our ability to, as communities now, reject and dismiss the hype and the propaganda that's going to be coming along with that, part and parcel. And I don't think anybody wants to even begin going down that road again. And that's where I think that the people that are out there that are watching this, we're only going to get an hour here with David right now, but there is so much available on your website. So I want to take a couple of minutes, David, to have you kind of lead us through this and where people can get plugged into what they maybe need the most out of this. And thank you for doing this. I think this is just a few months old, if I'm not mistaken, that you've been able to get this together. And for there's massive.
Well, the website was updated a couple of months ago, and it's been a cumulative of 4 years. But if you click on interviews at the top, what the interviews will do is that will show you just a whole raft of interviews, and I'd usually do a couple of weeks, so we're update on there. So if you just want a bit of easy sort of listening to get familiar with stuff, then that's a place to look. There's one down there actually, which is how to wake up friends and family, which I don't use those terms, but they're very catchy, obviously. That's quite useful. But if you go back to the top of the resources is where I'd say people to start. Now, the other thing is we're quite limited in time and resources and etc. So we've just tried to do the best we can. In an ideal world, I would do it much more depth. But under that resources tab, one of the places I would start in communication is the do's and don'ts in conversation, which is a very useful document where we pull together so much of the research along with practice. So I went through a whole phase of just talking to so many people and trying to talk to them in a different way to find a way that I could literally hold a conversation where we would listen to each other. And what we found was that there's so many elements. And what I talk about with this is that trying to get through to the rational part of someone that holds different views from you is like navigating an obstacle course. The problem is that we have a blindfold on because we don't know what those obstacles are. And the point of this document is to take the blindfold off, that for instance, I did a presentation yesterday and one of the gentlemen said, I don't know what it is, but I always trigger people.
I said, I was going to say, you call it, I call it a minefield because when you touch it, they explode.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when you learn to be able to navigate that minefield, you can literally, because what's going on, the minute that person triggers into the unconscious emotional part of that mind, they literally because they're trying to protect themselves.
Fight or flight.
Yeah, exactly. The anger is literally that they feel they need to defend themselves because
they're threatening their perception of safety.
Exactly. Now, what happens is the truth of the matter is that you're trying to help them protect themselves. But you see, the question is, and there's a really interesting thing in NLP that we say the meaning of the communication is the response you get. So not your intention, it's what you get. So if you use that as a baseline and say, right, if I triggered this person, what was it I said that triggered them? And you learn a way to be able to communicate that message without triggering them, then in fact, what happens is after a while, and I practiced so often and I made so many mistakes continuously, like any endeavor, that a fool who persists in his folly will become wise. And what happened is I got to the point where I no longer get called a conspiracy theorist. I no longer get caught under those other silly terms. And I'm able to keep someone from triggering in defense for the most part. And the communication channel stays open. So that's a very useful document from that. Then if you click on resources again, and I'm just going to open it myself because it's quite small on the on my screen there. So there's a lot of presentations that people can access. Then there's a couple of courses. One of them's on messaging, one of them's on debating. There's a link on Dan Aston Gregory because when I did a podcast with him, we put lots of links. But some of the other things are really useful. But if you click on all courses, what I put up there was, because it was BC Rising, who's a brilliant group in British Columbia there, which I think was the one you attended.
Yeah.
We did a workshop and we did 6 hours. So it was 2 hours, 3 lots of 2 hours, and literally designed the workshop. And we pretty much, it was literally just the price of a book. So $550 works out about 10 Canadian dollars.
That's
And
this one down here,
yeah,
folks. That
yeah,
you're out there.
that's on there.
I caught a 2-hour segment of this, and I will make sure that you get more than $20 out of that, because I'm a starving artist, aka journalist. But the point I'm trying to make is folks, that's $10. If you've got somebody that you want to reopen or reestablish communication with, that'll be the best dang $10 you ever spent. I promise.
Well, that was some of the nice comments, actually, and it was quite, see, because ideally I would like to be able to give it all away free, but the problem is that I've had to dedicate all my time to this full time, and I've had to fund the project basically by selling assets, and it's coming to the point now to get some longevity to be able to sustain it. We've got to start doing some kind of, you know, books, courses, whatever it is. But certainly a few people said that that was a very good use of $10. That if you if you sort of click on it, what it is, it's like a Udemy. I don't know if people have used Udemy, but then what you have is literally a curriculum. And I don't know if you're, so on my version, under the curriculum is all the different videos, and you just watch them one by one. There you go. And then there's lots and lots of resources that are very useful. One of the videos, if you're having trouble communicating with friends, I'd say, or friends and family, is a must, is it's called Dreading Family Gatherings. And I can post it's on the YouTube channel. And it's
if you
really
if you can throw that into our private chat here, I'll make sure that that gets out to everybody watching the show for sure.
Yeah, I'll pop that in there because it's such a useful video. Because the thing is, and what's been so right, so I'll just pop it in the chat there, that I spent 3 weeks in Canada, and I presented the We Unify conference, and I was telling someone today that my trip to Canada changed me. The Canadian people were so caring, so loving. I saw such fight in them, which was interesting because some of the Canadians at the beginning of it was so frustrated because people were just not fighting back. But I think Canada is really in a spot now to make a big difference. And, I've been doing a lot of work with the Canadian groups. And even from the few little segments that I managed to present in the gaps, we had some lovely testimonials where people finally got through, so a father finally got through to his son. And then there was a lady that got through to her ex-husband and her father on the same day. And a lot of that was really not logical in terms of, it wasn't telling them what to say. It was a change in their emotions. Okay. So the gentleman literally turned around and I said to him, "Look, you've got to be vulnerable. You mustn't make it that he's wrong and you're right and all these things. Just connect." So he turned around to his son. He said, "Look, I really want to talk to you. I really want to be able to communicate with you, but I don't know what to do. Tell me, what do I need to do?" And that literally just opened the door that they both put their defenses down. They both became vulnerable. And then they had a lovely conversation. And then the son was able to admit, "Yeah, Dad, it wasn't fair on you during the pandemic, what they did, and the way that, you were isolated, we're not wanting the." So yeah, that, the emotions play such a major role that when people say to me, what's the biggest manipulation? It's literally the manipulation of our emotions.
That's
what the biggest way.
It is what every headline seeks to do.
Yeah, exactly.
It literally is, and that might be somebody's attempt to do something good or not, either which way. But that is what the tool of the headline. It's literally that's its purpose that it serves. This has been really, really amazing, David. And I'm gonna put you on the spot here a little bit with something. And just as I was waiting for you to come into the studio, I read a posting on Twitter, and it really it really cracked my heart where this was coming from, and I'm going to pull this up here and see, you know, what your response to this person would be. So I'll read it for the folks that are out here and get your response. There's people are probably watching on 4x2s, which they will never be able to see it. But so the comment is, so I just had a baby 3 days ago, refused all shots. My partner has the shits with me about it as he believes childhood vaccines are completely safe. The midwife just came to check over our daughter. Everything is good. However, when she was here, he asked her if children that were unvaccinated are weaker, and she said yes. So he walked off upstairs, having the shits with me again, just looking for some advice on how to navigate this. The last thing I want is arguments over it, but he thinks he is 100% right, and I'm, you know, crazy for refusing the shots. A few months back, his cousin had 2 3-month-old babies in her family, one on her side, other on her husband's, die from SIDS. He always comments that I'm just believing crap that's written on the internet, and we are asking proper doctors from the hospital where our daughter was born. I recently bought the book Turtles All the Way Down. I'm hoping I can get him to read it. I'm so scared to vaccinate after knowing what I know now, but he thinks I'm just crazy. David, this encapsulates 100 stories a week in my inbox.
Yeah, well, that's such a common thing. Now, I can give some summaries, but there's almost a long list of things that you want to understand about talking to someone that will enable you to be able to communicate with that person. The first thing is you must stop pushing, okay? Because what happens is when it gets into a game of who's right, you can't convince anyone anything. So what you have to do is you first move to principle, okay? So the woman wants to sit down with her husband and say, look, nothing is more important to me than the safety of our child. Okay. And I know you feel the same. Okay. So can we have that as the focal point, that we both love our child and we love each other? And can we have this as it's not who's right or wrong, that we find what's most important for our child? Now, can you feel the energy change already when you listen to that? Yeah. Because once you get that,
tension, the conflict is gone.
Yeah, the goal changes. The goal changes. You can't change someone's position, but the position will change when the principle is established. Okay, you can't push someone from their position. So then I could say
volume only goes down when you push. They're hearing. They turn their hearing aid off.
Yeah. So basically, what you're doing is you elicit a different goal. Okay, because he thinks the goal is safety, but he's stuck in trying to be right. Okay, and that will overshadow us, and people will literally, I mean, look at the disasters in history. I mean, the biggest air crash in history is because the pilot said, oh, bugger it, I'm just going to go because it's my choice. Whatever. So basically, people thinking they're right and that false, certainty. So that's one of the first places is really we talk about getting on the same side. You've got to get on the same side of the issue. And people think they're on opposite sides, but they're not. They both want safety. They both want the protection of the child. So they're on the same side. So once you can get that established, a lot of the conflict will go. And then what the person can say is, look, I know that from the information that you've seen and a lot of the common beliefs that people think this is the case. And you've really got to feel it at this point. And this is why people want scripts and other stuff, but it's different every time. So if the person's quite open, or depending on who they are, I would say, but look, the doctors were selling cigarettes to patients at the bedside in the 50s and 60s. So
thalidomide.
Yeah, all of these things. So we know historically that because the safety of our child is so important, we can't just rely on someone else's opinion, because historically there's been lots of mistakes. And then I'd say, look, if I could show you some objective information that I've looked at, and I look at your information, and then we ask a question. So basically it's getting that dialogue going, which has to but you've got to get them on the same side. And then if you were to read that document, the do's and don'ts in conversation, it will give you lots of things. But basically, there's lots of ways of telling when someone's not in this dialogue versus debate, because when you're in a debate, it doesn't matter what you say. Okay, because all they're going to do is they're going to dismiss, they're going to see what they want to see, and then they're going to say their part. But when you're out of debate and into dialogue, everything changes. So that would be my initial thing. But there's a lot, a lot more to it.
Of
But what
course.
happens is when you practice it, you just automatically stop triggering people, and then because once you ask people rational questions and keep them in the rational part of the brain, it just becomes self-evident. So I would say to things like people, so if Pfizer put safety before profits before safety, would that be a problem? Well, yeah, obviously. Well, they've done that time and time again, and they've been fined time and time again for it. So the question is, in that instance, have they done it here? And if they have done it here, do we need to know about it? So all I'm doing is asking a series of self-evident questions, which are so obviously true, that basically the person's going to start thinking in a slightly different way. But you've so got to avoid getting into emotions, because you can't rationalize, you can't be rational with someone that's emotional.
Feelings don't care what the facts are.
Exactly.
And that's the double-edged sword of all of this. Facts don't care what feelings are, and feelings don't care what the facts are, and you're going to get a chance to decide which side of that conversation you're going to have. And most people are manipulated into having the emotional discussion before the factual one, and that's kind of where things go sideways and keep going sideways.
Yeah, and that nurse, I mean, that's so, because there's no study that shows vaccinated are healthy. In fact, completely the opposite.
But understanding if that nurse goes against the popular opinion of the hospital, is she going to be the nurse in that hospital at that point?
But here's the thing: she's literally lying, but she doesn't realize that she's lying. Okay, that's what's so crazy. It's been great talking to you, Wayne. I'd love to.
Fabulous, David.
I've got another appointment now, but I'll happily come back some point in the near future. And
absolutely. Thank you so much for the generous amount of your time, David. And I cannot wait to dive into this again, because there's no way we get through it today. So thank you so much, and have an amazing week. And we'll see you when it's due again.
Great stuff. Cheers, Wayne. Bye-bye.
Cheers. That was a fascinating conversation. You could have gotten lost in that conversation for hours, but we're going to get David back again, and to make sure that everybody understands where to go to get plugged in, go to reachingpeople.net. And if you want to contact David directly, you can reach him at info@reachingpeople.net. So wow, such a drink from a fire hose again. The thing that I want to drive home is for $10 we take a bigger risk on getting a shitty cup of coffee than what it might be worth in getting our families back, or opening a channel of communication with somebody else that matters to you guys all. So on that note, it's been absolutely unbelievable opportunity to speak with David, to have him in here to speak with you guys. And I think we're going to be setting up some more stuff. Busy guy. We're talking about some other stuff down the road in the future. But for tonight, I love you all. Stay mighty, my fellow warriors and patriots and hostages. Tomorrow is back on track. Bryce is back with Bankers, Bandits, Bullion, and Bucks. Last night's show with Natasha from Montreal. Got to check that out, guys. That'll make your blood run chilled. And so we will see you all again tomorrow. Peace.